These smart, successful leaders were hooked by their negative thoughts and emotions. Cynthia was absorbed by guilt. Jeffrey was exploding with anger. Cynthia told the voices to go away. Jeffrey bottled his frustration. Both were trying to avoid the discomfort they felt. They were being controlled by their inner experience, attempting to control it or switching between the two, getting unhooked. Fortunately, both Cynthia and Jeffrey realized that they couldn't go on, at least not successfully and happily, without more effective inner strategies. We coached them to adopt the 4 practices. First one being recognize your patterns. The first step in developing emotional agility is to notice when you've been hooked by your thoughts and feelings. That's hard to do, but there are certain telltale signs. One is that your thinking becomes rigid and repetitive. For example, Cynthia began to see that her self-recriminations played like a broken record, repeating the same messages over and over again. Another is that the story your mind is telling seems old, like a rerun of some past experience. Jeffrey noticed that his attitude towards certain colleagues, he's incompetent, there's no way I'm letting anyone speak to me like that, was quite familiar. In fact, he had experienced something similar in his previous job, and in one that before. The source of trouble was not just Jeffrey's environment, but his own patterns of thought and feeling. You have to realize that you are stuck before you can initiate change. Second, label your thoughts and emotions. When you are hooked, the attention you give your thoughts and feelings crowds your mind. There is no room to examine them. One strategy that may help you consider your situation more objectively is the simple act of labeling. Just as you call a spade, call a thought, and an emotion. I'm not doing enough at work or at home because I'm having the thought that I'm not doing enough work at home. Similarly, my coworker is wrong. He makes me so angry because I'm having the thought that my coworker is wrong and I'm feeling anger. Labeling allows you to see your thoughts and feelings for what they are, trusted sources of data that may or may not prove helpful. Humans are psychologically able to take this helicopter view or private experiences, and mounting scientific evidence shows that simple, straightforward mindfulness practice like this is not only improves behavior and well-being, but also promotes beneficial biological changes in the brain and at the cellular level. As Cynthia started to slow down and label her thoughts, the criticism that had once pressed on her like a dense fog became more like clouds passing through a blue sky. Third, accept them. The opposite of control is acceptance. Not acting on every thought or resigning yourself to negativity, but responding to your ideas and emotions with an open attitude. Paying attention to them and letting yourself experience them. Take 10 deep breaths and notice what's happening in the moment. This can bring relief, but it won't necessarily make you feel good. In fact, you may realize just how upset you really are. The important thing is to show yourself and others some compassion and examine the reality of the situation. What's going on both internally and externally? When Jeffrey acknowledged that and made the room for his feelings of frustration and anger, rather than rejecting them, quashing them, or taking them out on others, he began to notice their energetic quality. They were a signal that something important was at stake and that he needed to take productive action instead of yelling at people. He could make a clear request of a colleague or move swiftly on a pressing issue. The more Jeffrey accepted his anger and brought his curiosity to it, the more it seemed to support rather than undermine his leadership. Fourth, act on your values. When you unhook yourself from your difficult thoughts and emotions, you expand your choices. You can decide to act in a way that aligns with your values. We encourage leaders to focus on the concept of workability. Is your response going to serve you and organization in the long term as well as the short term? Will it help you steer others in a direction that furthers your collective purpose? Are you taking a step forward, being the leader you most want to be and living the life you most want to live? The mind's thought stream flows endlessly and emotions change like the weather, but values can be called on at any time in any situation. What are your values? This list is drawn from the Personal Values Card Sword 2001, developed by W.R. Miller, J.C. DeBacca, Matthews and P.L. Wilburn of the University of New Mexico. Accuracy. Okay, I'll just read it first. You can use it to quickly identify the values you hold that might inform a challenging situation at work. When you next make a decision, ask yourself whether it is consistent with these values. Accuracy, achievement, authority, autonomy, caring, challenge, comfort, compassion, contribution, cooperation, courtesy, creativity, dependability, duty, family, forgiveness, friendship, fun, generosity, genuineness, growth, health, helpfulness, honesty, humility, humor, justice, knowledge, leisure, mastery, moderation, nonconformity, openness, order, passion, popularity, power, purpose, rationality, realism, responsibility, risk, safety, self-knowledge, service, simplicity, stability, tolerance, tradition, or wealth. When Cynthia considered her values, she recognized how deeply committed she was to both her family and her work. She loved being with her children, but she also cared passionately about the pursuit of justice. Unhooked from her distracting and discouraging feelings of guilt, she resolved to be guided by her principles. She recognized how important it was to get home for dinner with her family every evening and to resist work interruptions during that time. But she also undertook to make a number of important business trips, some of which coincided with school events that she would have preferred to attend. Confident that her values, not solely her emotions, were guiding her, Cynthia finally found peace and fulfillment. It's impossible to block out difficult thoughts and emotions. Effective leaders are mindful of their inner experience but not caught in them. They know how to free up their internal resources and commit to actions that align with their values. Developing emotional guilt is no quick fix. Even those who, like Cynthia and Jeffrey, regularly practice the steps we've outlined here will often find themselves hooked, but over time, leaders who become increasingly adept at it are the ones most likely to thrive. Chapter 6: Don't let power corrupt you. In the behavioral research I've conducted over the past 20 years, I've uncovered a disturbing pattern. While people usually gain power through traits and actions that advance the interest of others, such as empathy, collaboration, openness, fairness, and sharing, when they start to feel powerful or enjoy a position of privilege, those qualities begin to fade. The powerful are more likely than other people to engage in rude, selfish, and unethical behavior. The 19th century historian and politician Lord Acton got it. Power does tend to corrupt. I call this phenomenon the power paradox, and I've studied it in numerous settings: colleges, the US Senate, pro sports teams, and a variety of other professional workplaces. In each, I've observed that people rise on the basis of their good qualities, but their behavior grows increasingly worse as they move up the ladder. This shift can happen surprisingly quickly. In one of my experiments, known as the Cookie Monster study, I brought people into a lab in groups of 3, randomly assigned one to a position of leadership, and then gave them a group writing task. A half hour into their work, I placed a plate of freshly baked cookies, one for each team member, plus an extra in front of everyone. In all groups, each person took one and, out of politeness, left the extra cookie. The question was, who would take a second treat? Knowing that it would deprive others of the same. It was nearly always the person who had been named the leader. In addition, the leaders were more likely to eat with their mouths open, lips smacking and crumbs falling onto their clothes. Studies show that wealth and credentials can have a similar effect. In another experiment, Paul Piff of the UC Irvine and I found that whereas drivers of the least expensive vehicles, Dodge Colts, Plymouth Satellites, always ceded the right way of pedestrians in a crosswalk, people driving luxury cars such as BMW and Mercedes yielded only 54% of the time. Nearly half the time they ignored the pedestrian and the law. Surveys of employees in 27 countries have revealed that wealthy individuals are more likely to say that it's acceptable to engage in unethical behavior, such as taking bribes or cheating on taxes. And recent research led by Danny Miller at HEC Montreal demonstrated that CEOs with MBAs are more likely than with those without MBAs to engage in self-serving behavior that increases their personal compensation but causes their company's value to decline. These findings suggest that iconic abuses of power, Jeffrey Skilling's fraudulent accounting at Enron, Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski, illegal bonuses, Silvio Berlusconi Bunga Bunga parties, Leonas Helmsley's tax evasion, are extreme examples of the kinds of misbehavior to which all leaders at any level are susceptible. Studies show that people in positions of corporate power are 3 times as likely as those at the lower rungs of the ladder to interrupt co-workers, multitask during meetings, raise their voice, and say insulting things at the office, and people who have just moved. And people who have just moved into their senior roles are particularly vulnerable to losing their virtues. My research and other studies indicate the consequences can be far-reaching. The abuse of power ultimately tarnishes the reputations of executives, undermining their opportunities for influence. It also creates stress and anxiety among their colleagues, diminishing rigor and creativity in the group and dragging down team members. Engagement and performance. In a recent poll of 800 managers and employees in 17 industries, about half of the respondents who reported being treated rudely at work said they deliberately decreased their effort or lowered the quality of their work in response. So how can you avoid succumbing to the power of paradox through awareness and action? A need for reflection. A first step is developing a greater self-awareness. When you take on a senior role, you need to be attentive to the feelings that accompany your newfound power and to any changes in your behavior. My research has shown that power puts us into something like a manic state, making us feel expansive, energized, omnipotent, hungry for rewards, and immune to risk, which opens up to rash, rude, and unethical actions. But new studies in neuroscience find that simply by reflecting on those thoughts and emotions, hey, I'm feeling as if I should rule the world right now, we can engage regions of our frontal lobes that help us keep our worst impulses in check. When we recognize and label feelings of joy and confidence, we are less likely to make irrational decisions inspired by them. When we acknowledge feelings of frustration, perhaps because subordinates aren't behaving the way we want, we are less likely to respond in adversarial or confrontational ways. You can build this kind of self-awareness through everyday mindfulness practices. One approach starts with sitting in a comfortable and quiet place, breathing deeply and concentrating on the feeling of inhaling and exhaling physical sensations, or sounds or sights in your environment. Studies show that spending just a few minutes a day on such exercises gives people greater focus and calm, and for that reason techniques for them are now taught in training programs at companies like Google, Facebook, Aetna, General Mills, Ford, and Goldman Sachs. It is also important to reflect on your demeanor and actions. Are you interrupting people? Do you check your phone when others are talking? Have you told a joke or story that embarrassed or humiliated someone else? Do you swear at the office? Have you ever taken sole credit for a group effort? Do you forget colleagues' names? Are you spending a lot more money than in the past or taking unusual physical risk? If you answered yes to at least a few of these questions, take it as an early warning sign that you're being tempted into problematic, arrogant displays of power. What may seem innocuous to you probably doesn't to your subordinates. Consider a story I recently heard about a needlessly called lunch, delivery protocol on a cable television writing team. Each day when the team's sandwiches arrived, they were doled out to the writers in order of seniority. In failing to correct this behavior, the group's leaders were almost centrally diminishing its collaborative and creative potential. For contrast, consider US military mess halls where the practice is the reverse, as the ethnographer and author Simon Sinek notes in the title of his most recent book, Leaders Eat Last. Officers adhere to the policy not to cede authority but to show respect to their troops. Whether you've already begun to succumb to the power of paradox or not, you must work to remember and repeat the virtuous behaviors that helped you rise in the first place. When teaching executives and others in positions of power, I focus on three essential practices: empathy, gratitude, and generosity, that have been shown to sustain benevolent leadership even in the most cutthroat environments. For example, Lin Tenbing, Chris Liu, Samir Srivastava, and I found that US senators who used empathetic facial expressions and tones of voice when speaking to the floor got more bills passed than those who used domineering, threatening gestures and tones in their speeches. Research by Anita Woolley of Carnegie Mellon and Thomas Malone of MIT has likewise shown that when teammates subtly signal understanding, engagement, interest, and concern for one another, the team is more effective at tackling hard analytical problems. Small expressions of gratitude also yield positive results. Studies show that romantic partners who acknowledge each other's value in casual conversations are less likely to break up. That students who receive a pat on the back from their teachers are more likely to take on difficult problems, and that people who express appreciation to others in a newly formed group feel stronger ties to the group months later. Adam Grant of Wharton has found that when managers take the time to thank their employees, those workers are more engaged and productive. And my own research on NBA teams with Michael Krause of Yale University shows that players who physically display their appreciation through head rubs, bear hugs, and hip and chest bumps inspire their teammates more to play better and win nearly 2 more games per season, which is both statistically significant and often the difference between making the playoffs and not. Simple acts of generosity can be equally powerful. Studies show that individuals who share with others in a group, for example, by contributing new ideas or directly assisting on projects not their own, are deemed more worthy of respect and influence and more suitable for leadership. Mike Norton at Harvard Business School has found that when organizations provide an opportunity to donate to charities at work, employees feel more satisfied and more productive. It might seem difficult to constantly follow the ethics of good power when you are the boss and responsible for making sure things gets done. Not so, your capacity for empathy, gratitude, and generosity can be cultivated by engaging in simple social behaviors, whenever the opportunity presents itself. A team meeting, a client pitch or negotiation, a 360-degree feedback session. Here are a few suggestions to practice empathy. Ask a great questions or two in every interactions and paraphrase important points that others make. Listen with gusto. Orient your body and eyes towards the person speaking and convey interest and engagement vocally. When someone comes to you with a problem, signal concern with phrases such as "I'm sorry" and "that's really tough." Avoid rushing to judgment and advice. Before meetings, take a moment to think about the person you will be with and what is happening in his or her life. Arturo Behar, Facebook Director of Engineering, is one executive I've seen make empathy and priority as he guides his teams of designers, coders, data specialists, and writers. Watching him at work, I've noticed that his meetings all tend to be structures around a cascade of open-ended questions and that he never fails to listen thoughtfully. He leans towards whoever is speaking and carefully writes down everyone's ideas on a notepad. These small expressions of empathy signal to his team that he understands their concerns and wants them to succeed together. To practice gratitude, make thoughtful thank yous a part of how you communicate with others. Send colleagues specific and timely emails of notes or appreciations for jobs done well. Publicly acknowledge the value that each person contributes to your team, including the support staff. Use the right kind of touch, pats on the back, fist bumps, or high fives to celebrate successes. When Douglas Conant was CEO of the Campbell Soap Company, he emphasized a culture of gratitude across the organization. Each day he and his executives assistants would spend up to an hour scanning his email at the company, intranet for news of employees who were making a difference. Conrad would then personally thank them, everyone from senior executives to maintenance people, for their contributions, usually with handwritten notes. He estimates that he wrote at least 10 a day for a total for about 30,000 during his decade-long tenure, and says he would often find them pinned up in employees' workspaces. Leaders, I've thought, have shared other tactics, giving small gifts to employees, taking them out to nice lunches or dinners, hosting Employee of the Month celebrations, and setting up real or virtual gratitude walls, on which coworkers can thank one another for specific contributions. To practice generosity, seek opportunities to spend a little one-on-one time with the people you lead. Delegate some important and high-profile responsibilities. Give praise generously. Share the limelight. Give credit to all who contribute to the success of your team and your organization. Pixar director Pete Docter is a master of this last practice. When I first started working with him on the movie Inside Out, I was curious about the cinematic marvel he had created 5 years before. The montage at the start of the film Up, which shows the protagonist Carl meeting and falling in love with a girl, Ellie, enjoying a long married life with her, and then watching her succumb to illness. When I asked how he had accomplished it, his answer was an exhaustive list of the 250 writers, animators, actors, story artists, designers, sculptors, editors, programmers, and computer modelers who had worked on it with him. When people ask about the box office success of Inside Out, he gives a similar response. Another Facebook executive I've worked with, product manager Kelly Winters, shows credit in a similar way. When she does PowerPoint presentations or talks to reporters about the success of her compassion team, she always lists or talks about the data analysts, engineers, and content specialists who made it happen. You can outsmart the power paradox by practicing the ethics of empathy, gratitude, and generosity. It will bring out the best work and collaborative spirit of those around you. And you too will benefit with a burnished reputation, long-lasting leadership, and the dopamine-rich delights of advancing the interest of others. Chapter 7, Mindfulness for people who are too busy to meditate. Mindfulness has become almost a buzzword, but what it is really. Quite simply, mindfulness is being present and aware, moment by moment, regardless of circumstances. For instance, researchers have found that practicing mindfulness can reprogram the brain to be more rational and less emotional. When faced with a decision, meditators who practice mindfulness showed increased activity in the posterior insula of the brain, an area linked to rational decision-making. This allowed them to make decisions based more on fact than emotion. This is a good news since other research has found that reasoning is actually suffused with emotion. These two are inseparable. What's more, our positive and negative feelings about people, things, and ideas arise much more rapidly than our conscious thoughts in a matter of milliseconds. We push threatening information away and hold friendly information close. We apply fight or flight reflexes not only to predators but also to data itself. There are specific techniques that you can practice to help you reap the benefits of mindfulness. You may have heard about a mindfulness enhancing technique where you meditate for a period of time before going about the rest of your day. This is definitely valuable, but I prefer practicing mindfulness all day, in every circumstance. In essence, you start living all of life mindfully, and over time there is no distinction between your formal mindfulness practice and making a presentation, negotiating a deal, driving your car, working out, or playing a round of golf. Try a technique I call micro-meditations. These are meditations that can be done several times a day for 1 to 3 minutes at a time. Periodically throughout the day, become aware of your breath. It could be when you feel yourself getting stressed or overwhelmed, with too much to do and too little time. Or perhaps when you notice yourself becoming increasingly distracted and agitated. First, notice the quality of your breathing. Is it shallow or deep? Are you holding your breath and in so doing perhaps also holding your stomach? Are you hunching your shoulders? Next, start breathing so that you're bringing the breath into the belly. Do not strain. If it feels too unnatural, then try bringing the breath down into the lower chest. If the mind wanders, gently come back to the breath, without judging yourself for momentarily losing focus. You will notice that by regularly practicing these micro meditations, you will become more aware and calmer. You will find yourself to be increasingly mindful, calm, and focused. It's helpful to create reminders for yourself to practice these meditations throughout the day. You can do them 2 to 4 times a day, every hour, before you go to a meeting, or whenever you feel like multitasking is eroding your concentration. Whatever is feasible and feels right to you. Micro meditations can put you back on track and help you develop your mindfulness muscle. A second technique I use is one I call mindfulness in action. Instead of adding a new routine to your day, just experience your day a little differently by paying attention in a particular way, for seconds at a time. For instance, if you ever been in a meeting and suddenly notice that you've missed what was just said before because you were somewhere else, for the last few minutes, chances are you weren't being mindful. Maybe you were thinking about your next meeting, everything on your to-do list, or an incoming text. Or perhaps you just zoned out. This is incredibly common. Unfortunately, not being present in this way can cause misunderstandings, missed opportunities, and wasted time. The next time you're in a meeting, try to do nothing but listen for seconds at a time. This is harder than it sounds, but with practice you will be able to listen continuously, without a break in concentration. Whenever you notice that your mind has wandered, come right back to listening to the voice of the person who is speaking. You may have to redirect your attention dozens of times in a single meeting. It's extremely common. Always bring yourself back gently and with patience. You're training the mind to be right here, right now. These techniques can, as I've said, rewire the brain. As a result, 3 critical things happen. First, your ability to concentrate increases. Second, you see things with increasing clarity, which improves your judgment. And third, you develop equanimity. Equanimity enables you to reduce physiological and emotional stress, and it enhances the likelihood that you will be able to find creative solutions to problems. Practicing mindfulness and reaping its benefits doesn't have to be a big time commitment or require special training. You can start right now in this moment. Chapter 8 is something lost when we use a mindfulness as a productivity tool. I came to something lost when you use mindfulness as a productivity tool. I came to mindfulness as a healing practice after overcoming an addiction to the drug Adderall during my junior year of college. I found myself in this situation because I thought that using Adderall to help me focus was no big deal, an attitude shared by 81% of students nationwide. Adderall simply seemed like an innocuous shortcut to getting things done efficiently and effortlessly. I still remember the rush I felt my first night on Adderall. I completed every page of assigned Faulkner reading, not easy, started and finished papers several weeks before the date. Because why not? Swiffered my room twice and answered all of my unread emails, even the irrelevant ones. It's also worth noting that I had forgotten to eat all night and somehow found myself still awake at 4 a.m. with my jaw clenched and my stomach rumbling. Sleep was nowhere in sight. What I saw initially as a shortcut to more focus and productivity ultimately turned out instead to be a long detour towards self-destruction, rather than thinking of focus as the byproduct of my own power and capability. I looked outside of myself, thinking that a pill would solve my problems. Long story short, I eventually came to grips with my problem, got off the drug, and found an antidote to my crippling self-doubt: meditation, particularly mindfulness or vipassana meditation. So to me, it's somewhat ironic that mindfulness has taken the media by storm, precisely because of its scientifically proven benefits for focus and productivity. It's not just because I came to mindfulness as a way of healing from the fallout of the amount of pressure I put on myself to be productive. While mindfulness is not a little blue pill, it's starting to be thought of as kind of a shortcut to focus and productivity. Not unlike a morning coffee, a wisdom tradition associated with personal growth and insight is now being absorbed by our culture as a tool for career development and efficiency. But should mindfulness really be used to attain a particular goal? Is it okay to think of a practice that's all about being as just other tool for doing? Companies seem to think so. Given the mindfulness buzz, it's no surprise that corporate mindfulness programs are proliferating across the country. Google offers Search Inside Yourself, classes that teach mindfulness meditation at work. As celebrated in the recent book Mindful Work by David Gals, corporations like Goldman Sachs, HBO, Deutsche Bank, Target, and Bank of America taught the productivity-related benefits of meditation to their employees. The world of professional athletics, most recently the NFL too, has drawn attention to the achievement-oriented underpinnings of the mainstream mindfulness movement. The 2015 Wall Street Journal article that explored the Seattle Seahawks' success and the 2014 Super Bowl explained that the team's secret weapon was its willingness to work with a sports psychologist who teaches mindfulness. Seahawks assistant head coach Tom Cable went so far as to describe the team as incredibly mindful. This article was written in January, a month before the Seahawks lost the 2015 Super Bowl. In the wake of their defeat, I heard several conversations among acquaintances and family members, all of whom were sports fans and were non-meditating but aware of meditation, in which they expressed skepticism about the power of meditation for focus and success. How much can we embrace the mindfulness as a tool for success if a team famous for meditating lost the Super Bowl? Still a lot. I think I am fine stopping here to admit. If you haven't already concluded yourself that the commodification of mindfulness as a productivity tool leaves me with a strange taste in my mouth. Above all, I am resistant to the theological attitude towards meditation, that it's a tool designed for a particular purpose, contingent on results. And yet, asserting this skepticism brings me back to a conversation I had with my vegan cousin a few years ago. He's a PhD student in biological anthropology, an animal activist, and a long-time vegan. When I asked him if he was irked by all the celebrities going vegan to lose weight, he shook his head vigorously. I would rather have people to do the right thing for the wrong reason than not do the right thing at all. He explained, the right thing here being veganism. This philosophy seems applicable to the mindfulness craze, aka MC mindfulness too. I'm happy more people are getting the myriad benefits of meditation. I'm glad that you're no longer thought of as patchouli-scented hippie or you're an avid meditator. If corporate mindfulness programs means that employee self-care is more valued in the workplace, then so be it. But I also think there is a room to consider an alternative way of talking about meditation, especially when it comes to how we relate to our work. Looking at mindfulness as a tool for accomplishing what we need to get done keeps us trapped in a future-oriented mindset rather than encouraging us to delay the present moment. Of course, this doesn't invalidate the neuroscience. Mindfulness helps us get more stuff done, but what about allowing mindfulness to just be? To have the effects it is going to have without attaching a marketing pitch to this ancient practice. Psychologist Kristin Neff is renowned for coining the term self-compassion. In particular, Neff has asserted that the first component of self-compassion is kindness. The ability to shrug off those times when we let ourselves down, when we don't get to check off everything from our to-do list. The other two components of self-compassion are the awareness and mindfulness. The goal is not to get more done, but to understand what we are enough, that our worth is not contingent to what we get done. Although students have shown that self-forgiveness actually helps procrastinate less. I'm not an idealist, but I'm not saying everyone should start oming, devoting themselves solely to self-compassion and forgetting all about their to-do list. But I'm saying that compassion and self-compassion ought to move into the foreground as we talk about mindfulness, even in corporate mindfulness programs. There is no shame in wanting to be productive at work, but there is also no shame in being able to cut yourself some slack to extend yourself some love during those times at work when things don't feel so great. Chapter 9. There are risks to mindfulness at work. Mindfulness is close to taking on cold status in the business world, but as with any rapidly growing movement, regardless of its potential benefits, there is a good reason here for caution. Championed for many years by pioneering researchers such as Ellen Langer and John Kabat-Zinn. Mindfulness is a mental orientation and set of strategies for focusing one's mind on here and now experiences, such as abdominal muscle movements during the respiration of the chirping of birds outside of one's window. This is rooted in ancient Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Buddhism. Contemporary empirical research demonstrates its benefits for reducing anxiety and mental stress. A recent study suggested that it might cut the risk of the stroke and heart attacks as well. Mindful meditation and related practices are now widely accepted. For example, the New Republic published an article entitled How 2014 Became the Year of Mindfulness. Mindfulness has also recently been featured on CBS 60 Minutes and been lauded the Huffington Post. Dan Harris, as a well-known ABC News correspondent, has published a best-selling book called 10% Happier, which describes his journey to discovering mindful meditation as an optimal way to manage his very publicly shared anxiety disorder. There is increasing interest in how mindfulness can be applied in clinical medicine and psychology, and some large insurance companies are even beginning to consider providing coverage for mindfulness strategies for certain patients. As an executive coach and physician, I often sing the praises of mindfulness practices, and I recommend them to clients to manage stress, avoid burnout, enhance leadership capacity, and steady the mind when in the midst of making important business decisions, career transitions, and personal life changes. Drawing on concepts from Eastern philosophies and research evidence from contemporary neuroscience, I help some clients employ controlled breathing and similar strategies in our sessions and in their everyday lives. I also refer clients to trusted colleagues who teach yoga and mindful meditations in greater depth that I can provide in my coaching sessions. But my growing knowledge and enthusiasm for mindfulness is now tempered by concern about its potential excesses and the risk that it may be crowding out other equally important models and strategies for managing stress, achieving peak performance, and reaching professional and personal fulfillment. At times, it appears that we are witnessing the development of a cult of mindfulness that, if not appropriately recognized and moderated, may result in an unfortunate backlash against it. Here are a couple of my concerns. The avoidance risk. Some people use mindfulness strategies to avoid critical thinking tasks. I've worked with clients who, instead of rationally thinking through a career challenge or ethical dilemma, prefer to disconnect from their challenges and retreat into a meditative mindset. The issue here is that some problems require more thinking, not less. Sometimes stress is a signal that we need to consider our circumstances through greater self-reflective thought, not a mindful retreat to focus breathing or immediate sensory experiences. Mindfulness strategies can prime the mind for sounder rational thinking, but the former clearly should not displace the latter. One of my clients spent so much time meditating and mindfully accepting her life on its own terms that she failed to confront underperforming workers, undiscipline or fire the worst offenders in her company. After periods of meditating, she struggled to return to focused, task-oriented thinking. She required significant reminders and reassurance from me that embracing Buddhist meditation does not entail tolerating substandard performance from her employees. Mindful meditation should always be used in the service of enhancing and not displacing people's rational and analytical thought processes about their careers and personal lives. The groupthink risk. As mindfulness practices enter mainstream American life, some organizations and companies are admirably encouraging their people to make use of them in their workplace. But I'm aware of situations where this new orientation has gone too far. In one case, the director of a business unit in a financial services corporation required his direct reports to participate several times per week in a 10 to 15 minute mindfulness session that involved controlled breathing and guided imagery. Many participants came to dread the exercise. Some of them felt extremely awkward. and uncomfortable, believing that mindfulness practices should be done in private. The very exercise that was supposed to reduce their work-related stress actually has increased it. The practice continued for weeks until several members of the group finally gathered the courage to tell the group leader that they would strongly prefer the daily exercises to be optional, with impunity for non-participants. Mindfulness is rooted in a philosophy and psychology of self-efficacy and proactive self-care. Imposing it on people on a top-down manner degrades the practice and the people who might benefit from using it of their own volition. That mindfulness has emerged as a major cultural phenomenon on the contemporary American scene. And in the business world in particular, can be good news for people dealing with stress, burnout, and other realities of the modern workplace. But mindful practices need to be incorporated as one among many self-chosen strategies for people aiming to cope with stress, thinking effectively, make sound decisions, and achieve fulfillment. Mindfulness practices should be used to enhance our rational and ethical thinking processes, not limit or displace them. And mindfulness practices should never be imposed on people, especially in the workplace. At its very core, mindfulness will be a huge step forward for Western culture if it stays focused on creating opportunities for individuals to discover their own personalized strategies for taming anxieties, managing stress, optimizing work performance, and reaching happiness and fulfillment. Yeah, so that's it. I finished. Good book. I can recommend it.